The dangerous man she married wasn't he saving her, it was you, Serena's prisoner, thought Lucian Drac was hers. Reeled, the only man powerful enough to protect her from Adrian's retaliation. But after Adrian fell, she found the hidden transactions, the offshore patterns, and the truth that nearly destroyed her. Lucian had been dismantling Adrian's empire before he ever met her. Serena wasn't his partner. She was his perfect cover. Welcome back to the Midnight Broadcast, listeners. Settle in, because tonight you and I are unpacking a masterclass in vengeance. Picture this. Big shot CEO Adrian Lockhart scrawls his name on those divorce papers, genuinely believing he is cutting dead weight. He figures his quiet wife, Serena Vale, will simply crawl into a dark room and cry herself to sleep. But here is the lesson for tonight. Never underestimate a quiet heart, because it remembers everything. 3 years later, she returns, wearing a massive diamond from the city's most ruthless mob boss, holding the leash to Adrian's empire. She did not come back for tears. She came for blood. Meanwhile, back in that courtroom, the cork from a $3,000 bottle of champagne blasts off the ceiling, and Adrian does not even blink. The man actually throws his head back and howls. It is a harsh, jagged laugh echoing through a courtroom where a judge just legally executed his marriage. He has this 24-year-old blonde draped over his shoulder, giggling into his custom-tailored suit. Across that cold marble aisle, Serena simply sits there, hands perfectly folded. Absolute, chilling zero. Her lawyer is buzzing in her ear, sweating, apologizing, but her face is a mask of pure ice. Adrian keeps shooting these desperate glances at her, practically begging for a crack. He wants the tears. He wants the broken sobs to prove he is the undisputed king of this ruin. But here is a truth you can take to the bank. People who desperately demand a reaction are usually the weakest ones in the room. But he gets absolutely nothing from her. The judge has been gone for 10 minutes, and just like that, 7 years of shared history vanish into a few drops of black ink. Adrian honestly feels like a massive chain has been cut from his ankle. The tragic part? He probably never loved her at all. To him, Serena was just the quiet genius who dragged Locke Enterprises out of the gutter and molded it into a multi-million-dollar beast. In Adrian's twisted mind, people are nothing more than tools, and Serena had simply expired. His new distraction purrs something sweet about leaving the building. Flashing an arrogant grin, Adrian finally tears his eyes away, bragging loudly about where they will celebrate. He walks away without looking back. Remember, some folks only value what you do for them, not who you actually are. Let us step back and look at this together, shall we? As far as this man is concerned, the woman who built him is already a ghost. He struts through those heavy oak doors with his new trophy on his arm, while his assistant drags a briefcase full of broken promises behind them. Staring at the towering skyline, Adrian feels like an untouchable king. But back is inside that empty courtroom. The supposed loser of this tragedy finally stands. When her lawyer reaches out, treating her like fragile glass, she coolly brushes his hand away. She packs her bag with a terrifying, absolute precision. That is the kind of cold control a person only finds when they are plotting absolute ruin. Not a single tear falls. The lesson is simple. My friends, never mistake a quiet exit for surrender. The truth is, the grieving phase died 3 months ago, when he first dropped the divorce papers on her lap. The man actually had the nerve to offer her his cramped old apartment and a pathetic settlement that would barely cover groceries for a year. And she just signed it all. No screaming matches. No shattering expensive vases against the wall. No hiring bloodthirsty lawyers. Adrian patted his own back, calling her sensible. His wealthy friends laughed and called her a pushover. But Serena? She quietly called it Phase 1. Stepping out of that courthouse into the biting autumn wind, she breathes in the sharp, sharp scent of wet asphalt. Her heels smack the pavement in a cold, hypnotic rhythm. Remember this sometimes. Letting someone think they won is the ultimate trap. She refuses to spare even a single glance back at that marble tomb. She walks right past the shiny black luxury sedan where Adrian and his new toy are tangled up in the back seat. Instead, she marches 3 blocks down, descends into the damp, flickering lights of the substation, and simply vanishes like smoke. Meanwhile, Adrian does not waste a single heartbeat thinking about her for 6 straight weeks. He is lost in the ultimate bachelor illusion. He is devouring the rare steaks she always hated, screaming over the bass at VIP clubs, and waking up next to strangers. He is intoxicated by his own reflection, completely convinced he is a god. Money is flowing, and he sits comfortably at the top. But hear me, well-unchecked pride is always the blindfold you wear to your own execution. He just locked down a $50 million contract with an artificial intelligence startup, basically carving his name in stone as a titan of automation. The press is absolutely eating from his palm. Glossy magazines plaster his face across their covers, hailing him as the ultimate visionary. He sits in his penthouse office, giving these arrogant interviews, painting a picture where he built the empire using only his own sweat. Nobody asks about the woman who actually drafted the blueprints. Serena is completely erased from the corporate memory. But listen closely. That is when the very first domino falls. A tiny supplier contract suddenly gets terminated. Just normal business friction, right? Except a second deal quietly dies, then a third evaporates. Small cracks always precede the avalanche. His finance chief, Paul, finally slams the red flags down on the mahogany desk during a tense quarterly review. The poor guy looks pale, absolutely rattled to his core. He taps a trembling pen against the folders, explaining that these ironclad partnerships are just jumping ship into the dark. Adrian barely looks up, swatting at the air like Paul is a buzzing fly. He barks at him to just throw more cash at the problem and make it go away. But Paul is sweating through his shirt. He stammers that the partners are leaving for someone whose vision aligns better. Adrian completely erupts, screaming at the man to shut his mouth and fix it. As Paul backs out, furious and humiliated, Adrian simply goes back to his expensive phone. Our arrogance will always make you deaf to the warning bells of your own ruin. He is far too obsessed with texting his new girlfriend about dinner reservations to notice his empire turning to ash. You and I both know the harsh reality here. Putting your hands over your eyes does not stop the fire from burning your house down. Within 30 agonizing days, 3 massive corporate deals simply evaporate. Desperate investors who used to kiss his ring are suddenly letting his calls ring out to voicemail. Then comes the devastating hook to the jaw. A healthcare partner that feeds 15% of his yearly revenue sends a cold termination email. No polite phone call, no negotiation, just gone. Suddenly, Adrian is chugging black coffee, surviving on 3 hours of sleep, and firing innocent analysts in blind panic. The media finally smells the blood in the water. Adrian finally shatters, launching a heavy business magazine straight across his sprawling office. He drags Paul into a frantic emergency meeting, screaming at him to uncover who is sabotaging the firm. Paul looks at his boss like he is staring at a madman, stuttering that corporate sabotage is a paranoid fantasy. Adrian snaps back. viciously reminding the man that he is paid to clean up messes, not to offer wisdom. But Adrian sees the quiet shift in Paul's eyes. It is a haunting mixture of pity and sinking doubt. It is the terrifying realization that the captain is the one sinking the ship. Adrian furiously rejects it. Meanwhile, an ocean away, Serena is sitting peacefully in a quiet European cafe by the water. True peace comes when you finally step away from the toxic noise. She is entirely captivated by the fact that absolutely nobody on these ancient stone streets knows her name. Nobody is pointing, nobody is whispering pitying remarks about the discarded wife. That total, profound anonymity is the sharpest blade she has ever wielded. She takes a slow sip of her bitter espresso, opens her laptop, and goes to war. The screen glows with a labyrinth of data, hidden shell companies, and aggressive takeover blueprints. She studies those numbers with the cold precision of a sniper. Every row of data is a wire pulled tight around Adrian's throat. Suddenly, her cheap burner phone vibrates. An encrypted text confirms 3 more contracts have flipped, tanking his quota by 18%. A ghost of a smile touches her lips. Silence is a weapon you only hear when it finally strikes. Her ultimate goal is simple. She wants his empire completely bled out by the time the bells ring in the new year. She snaps the laptop shut and leans back, watching elegant sailboats drift across the dark harbor. The violent red of the sunset pulls her right back to that humiliating afternoon in court. She remembers exactly how the harsh light caught his smug, victorious grin. She takes a deep, slow breath, quietly wondering if the clown is still laughing. I can promise you, listeners, he is not. Adrian is pacing a trench into his penthouse rug like a cornered animal. It is 3 a.m. His expensive tie is torn off, his shirt soaked in cold sweat. He even threw his shiny new girlfriend out days ago because her voice made his skin crawl. Always remember, karma collects its debts with heavy interest. The brutal mathematics are tearing his mind apart. His finance chief keeps warning him that this corporate bleeding is way too surgical to be bad luck. This is a highly coordinated assassination of his legacy. Someone invisible is pulling the noose tight, and he has zero idea who. Sure, Adrian stepped on plenty of throats on his climb up, but none of those ghosts had the sheer brainpower to pull this off. Desperate, he scrolls through his encrypted contacts and stops on Marcus Hale. This man is an underground operative who charges a fortune to destroy lives. Adrian used him years ago to bury a rival. He hits call, and the line connects instantly. He swallows his pride, admitting he needs to hunt a ghost. Listen closely when the walls finally close in. Desperation always drives a man back to his darkest sins. You and I have seen men break before. The timeline was just too flawless. A quiet divorce, a sudden disappearance, and then Adrian's golden life started crumbling, piece by agonizing piece. He finally choked out his ex-wife's name to his investigator. Marcus paused, stunned that Adrian was blaming his quiet former wife for a massive corporate bloodbath. Adrian roared at him to find her. He wanted her every move tracked and reported. Slamming the phone down, Adrian pressed a trembling hand against the freezing glass of his penthouse window. His absolute control was gone. Meanwhile, far from his panic, Serena was about to collide with the terrifying underground kingpin, Lucian Drax. The truth is, running from your past only guarantees it will meet you in the dark. Was quietly building an army of bitter lawyers and betrayed staff craving pure revenge. She took evening walks by the water, letting the cold ocean breeze numb her racing mind. She was not looking for a fight, and she definitely was not looking for him. But a monster like Lucian, you do not find him. He finds you. She stepped out of a small cafe when a pitch-black sedan rolled up to the curb. The heavy door swung open, and a dangerously smooth voice called out her real name. Serena froze. No one in this hidden town was supposed to know who she was. She turned slowly, knuckles turning white around her bag, as a massive shadow of a man stepped into the streetlights. We all learn this the hard way. No matter how deeply you bury your secrets, they will eventually dig themselves out. The man before her was breathtakingly handsome, but radiated pure terror, all sharp angles and unblinking focus. With a faint European accent, he warned her that she did not know him, but he knew everything about her. Serena was suffocating inside, but she kept her face perfectly blank. She fired back that his words were not exactly comforting. Lucian flashed a smile that could freeze water, stating he was not there to hold her hand. He came to make a deal. She shot him down instantly. He just tilted his head, watching her like a predator, admiring very stubborn prey. He saw her tearing Adrian down brick by brick, and he respected the bloodlust. Never forget this simple truth. Holding your calm composure when your world is spinning is the absolute sharpest weapon you can carry. Serena felt the blood drain from her face, rooted completely to the concrete. Lucian stepped right into her personal space, carrying the scent of pure danger. He dropped a heavy truth. She was brilliant, but playing the lone wolf made her a sitting target. When she demanded his name, he answered Lucian Drax. The name meant nothing to her, but the crushing weight in his voice proved this man moved mountains in the dark. He bluntly explained that he owned limitless resources, and more importantly, he shared a burning hatred for her ex-husband, Adrian. She wanted to tell him to walk away, but that cold certainty in his eyes made her ask about his game plan. It is a strange rule of life. Sometimes, the exact lifeline you desperately need is handed to you by the very devil himself. Bitter truth we all face eventually. Sometimes taking a terrifying risk is the only way to open doors you never knew existed. Lucian flashed that razor-sharp grin, offering a simple trade. One dinner, one conversation. If she hated his pitch, he would fade into the night like a ghost. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she found herself nodding. Fast forward to a hidden, windowless restaurant with 0 tourists and absolutely no menus. The chef just brought whatever he felt like making. Lucian ordered for them in flawless Italian, and Serena sat there, feeling swallowed by this dangerous underworld. He skipped the polite small talk entirely, leaning across the table to tell her he knew the exact, agonizing details of how Adrian had destroyed her entire life. Lucian laid the ugly cards on the table. He knew her ruthless ex-husband had stolen her brightest ideas to build his empire, completely erasing her name from the legacy. Serena sat there with a clenched jaw, realizing this stranger had pulled apart her darkest secrets. But his gaze held 0 pity. He looked through her defenses, calling her a brilliant strategist, not some broken victim. She dropped her fork, demanding his real angle. He wanted to fund her revenge. When she stubbornly claimed she could win the war alone, he shattered her pride. He warned her that Adrian was already hunting her shadows. She needed untraceable money, heavy muscle, and real protection. Remember, this blind pride will always dig your grave, and knowing when you truly need an army is the mark of a master survivor. Serena's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level, insisting she had Adrian handled. Lucian shattered that illusion with cold reality. Could she survive Adrian's bottomless bank account and vicious lawyers? He told her she had sparked a full-blown war, and wars require armies. Her mind spun wildly because he was entirely right. Adrian S., investigator, was already tracking her fragile network. She finally asked the heavy question. What exactly was his cut? Lucian simply leaned back, slowly swirling his dark wine. He whispered that his only payment was the pure joy of watching untouchable, arrogant men burn to ash. He sat there completely still, devoid of any weakness. The lesson here? Sometimes the fastest path to victory is shaking hands with a predator who hates the exact same man you do. Serena told him she needed time to think. Lucian gave a measured nod, warning her the clock was bleeding out. Fast forward 1 week. The silence in Adrian S. office was broken by a call from his investigator. Marcus had finally found her. Adrian practically dropped his phone. Marcus revealed she was tucked away in a European coastal town, living under her maiden name. But the detail that made Adrian's blood run cold was that she was doing absolutely nothing. No job, no new friends, just sipping coffee. Marcus warned it looked like a predator waiting to strike. Adrian killed the call, a suffocating paranoia wrapping around his throat. A quiet Serena was terrifying. Listen closely to this life lesson. Silence is often the absolute loudest warning sign that a massive storm is brewing right off your shores. Adrian paced his office, desperately trying to convince himself that Serena was broke and powerless. He told himself she was a nobody. Then, his phone vibrated against the desk. It was a frantic email from his right-hand paw. Another major investor had just vanished. It was the same brutal pattern, zero warning, no reason given. Adrian felt a cold wave of nausea hit his stomach. His mind dragged him back to the divorce court, remembering the eerie, dead-eyed calm on Serena's face. For the first time, the great Adrian was genuinely terrified. He sat awake until dawn in his dark office, completely paralyzed as his legacy cracked. He read that single email 17 times. Let this be a lesson. Never underestimate a person you have pushed to the absolute edge, because someone with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous force on earth. Let's look at a profound life lesson together. A guilty conscience will always build its own perfect prison of paranoia. Investors bleeding out without a word was way too clean to be just bad luck. Adrian could not scrub Serena out of his mind. When he ruined her, he expected to see a shattered woman. Instead, she had looked at him like he was already dead. Slipping into a blind panic, he snatched his phone at 3 a.m. Marcus answered with a groggy voice. But Adrian was completely unhinged. He screamed into the receiver, demanding to know every drop of coffee she drank and every soul she breathed near. He slammed the phone down hard. The man was literally trembling inside his tailored suit, pressing his sweating palms flat against his heavy desk just to hide his overwhelming terror from the empty room. Adrian paced the room, trying to hype himself up. He whispered that Serena might be a genius, but she lacked the teeth to be dangerous. Right on cue, his computer pinged. It was a frantic message from Paul, begging to speak face to face. Adrian ordered Tim to be there in 20 minutes. Paul burst through the doors after just 15, looking like a total wreck. His tie was yanked down, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he had aged a decade overnight. He slammed a heavy folder onto the desk, gasping that they were in fatal trouble. He scattered the papers everywhere, proving these were not random losses. They were highly coordinated, surgical strikes. Every single failure bled back to one central source. The life lesson here is brutal denying a harsh reality only guarantees the inevitable crash will completely destroy you. Adrian leaned over the desk, totally frantic, his eyes darting across endless names and drained accounts. He demanded to know what nightmare he was looking at. Paul's voice shook as he explained that every disaster led straight back to an untraceable shell company in Luxembourg. He had to dig through 6 heavy layers of corporate shielding just to expose the puppet master. The name on the final page was Veil Strategies. Adrian stood there confused. He had never heard that name in his life. Paul wiped his forehead, explaining they basically did not exist. They popped out of the shadows 4 months ago, yet whoever was running it was ruthlessly stealing their clients and bleeding their cash flow dry. The life lesson from here? True power never screams for attention. It operates in total silence, calmly pulling the strings while the rest of the world completely panics. 4 months ago, the ink dried on the divorce papers. Now, Adrian is drowning in cold sweat. He paces the floor, demanding his fixer, Paul, hunt down the phantom owner of Veil Strategies. But Paul just shakes his head. Every digital trail vanishes into the dark. Adrian collapses into his leather chair, desperately trying to blame a random corporate rival who smelled blood in the water. The tragic truth is, he has betrayed so many people that his list of enemies has no end. Paul hesitates before dropping the final crushing blow. This unseen ghost is not just bleeding the company dry, they are coming for his personal hidden wealth. A simple lesson to remember: the bridges you burn today will often light a clear path for your worst nightmares to find you tomorrow. You and I have seen men break before, but watch how Adrian crumbles. Paul stands in the dim office, warning him that someone is preparing an absolute slaughter. Adrian physically stops breathing. He wants to smash the room to pieces, but forces the rage down into a suffocating silence. He orders Paul to unmask this enemy at any cost. Left entirely alone in the quiet shadows, a sickening regret starts to eat at his soul. Deep down, past the arrogance, he already knows who is coming for his crown. Miles away, Serena sits perfectly still in the towering, hidden fortress of Lucien's penthouse. The life lesson here is written in the shadows. Our deepest intuitions rarely lie, even when our massive egos completely refuse to accept the terrifying truth. The penthouse feels heavy, framed by massive glass walls, overlooking the pitch-black harbor. It is a room built to strip a person of their confidence. Lucien leans back into the shadows, slowly swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, wearing the calm cruelty of a man who owns the world. He mentions that her ex-husband just unleashed a top-tier hound to hunt her down. Serena does not even blink. The ice in her veins holds steady. She quietly replies that she knows all about Marcus, daring the man to find her. Lucien pauses. He studies her face, and a rare, genuine smile breaks his mask. He whispers that she is either insanely brave or utterly foolish, a harsh life lesson for the night. Ultimate confidence is simply knowing your opponent's next move before they even realize they are playing your game. The silence hangs between them like a blade. Lucien asks if she is truly ready for the blood that will follow. Serena meets his cold stare, entirely unfazed by the titan across from her. Check back in 6 months, she tells him. Her sheer audacity pulls a sudden, booming laugh from the kingpin. It is a wild sound in a room usually filled with fear. He walks over to the glass city, lights cutting across his jawline, and his voice drops to a warning whisper. He reminds her that when Adrian figures out she pulled the strings, the man will completely lose his mind. He asks if she can survive a drowning man, because those men will drag you down with them. The simple life lesson here: never corner a desperate person, because that is exactly when they become truly dangerous. Listen to the madness spilling from this man's lips. He tells her she needs armor, something thicker than shadows. Then he drops the match into the gasoline. Marry me, he says. Serena freezes, searching his dark eyes for the punchline of a sick joke. When the silence stretches on, a hollow laugh escapes her chest. She calls him a lunatic, but Lucian is dead serious. He steps into her space, bringing the suffocating weight of his reality. He tells her she is a lone wolf, bleeding out in a war against a ruthless billionaire. If Adrian wants to crush her, he will. But if she wears the ring of a monster, the game ends tonight. It reveals an undeniable life lesson. Sometimes, surviving a massive storm means you have to team up with an even bigger monster to shield your own soul. Lucian leans in, his voice dropping to a gravelly rumble, swearing that nobody breathing ever touches what belongs to him. The words send a violent chill down Serena's spine. Her heart is hammering against her ribs. Trusting this kingpin feels like walking barefoot over broken glass. His only motive is the sadistic thrill of watching arrogant men fall apart. Yet, she knows he speaks the absolute truth. She cannot fight a titan alone. Steeling her nerves, she looks him dead in the eye and swears this is pure business. Zero romance. Lucian flashes a slow, predatory smile, savoring the thought of her ex-husband rotting in despair. A chilling life lesson to carry with you. True revenge is rarely a loud scream. Sometimes it is just a quiet, cold, and calculated business deal. She turns her gaze back to the harbor, watching the distant boats bobbing like fragile toys in the black water. Marrying a mob boss feels like stepping off a cliff with no net, but she remembers the agony of her past, the toxic cage she barely escaped. What is one more leap into the void? Her voice trembles slightly as she asks for time to think. Lucian's tone softens into something dangerously smooth, reminding her that the clock is bleeding out and Adrian is hunting her. Just like he predicted, the storm breaks 3 days later. A tired investigator pulls a tiny digital thread from the dark. One single, solitary signature buried deep in a foreign shell contract, ready to detonate everything. A quiet life lesson to remember. Every dark secret leaves a trace, no matter how deeply you try to bury it in the dirt. You and I are going to watch the universe collect its brutal debts right now. 7 in the morning, the phone rings. The tired investigator finally names the architect of Veil Strategies. Adrian stops breathing, gripping the receiver until his knuckles turn white. The detective explains the ghost was buried under 6 layers of shell companies, all anchored to an old apartment in Europe, an apartment owned by his quiet, forgotten ex-wife. The truth hits Adrian like a freight train. Serena is the one burning his corrupt empire to the ground. His entire grip on reality shatters into jagged pieces. The ultimate life lesson always hurts the most. Never underestimate the people you endlessly mistreat, because they just might return from the dark to completely dismantle your world. Adrian's mind completely short-circuits, plunging him into a waking nightmare. He stammers into the receiver, frantically denying the truth, swearing she lacks the money or viciousness to pull this off. But the investigator states the cold facts and cuts the line dead. Adrian stands totally alone, paralyzed by the silence. The gentle woman he discarded like broken glass, the wife he deemed far too weak to matter, is the architect of his absolute ruin. A scream rips from his throat. He launches his phone across the room, watching it shatter against the heavy doors. His hands shake violently as a dark, suffocating rage consumes him completely. The lesson here is soaked in tragic irony. Extreme arrogance will always blind you to the sharpest blades waiting right inside your own home. Right in the thick of his breakdown, the heavy brass landline begins to ring. Adrian snatches the receiver, desperately trying to glue his fractured sanity back together. It is Gerald Strauss, one of the wealthiest sharks in his investor pool, Without an ounce of pity, Gerald declares he is pulling every dime of his funding. Adrian feels his blood freeze. He starts begging, screaming frantically about loyalty and ironclad contracts. But Gerald is entirely hollow. Indeed, he casually triggers the instability clause, dropping that soul-crushing line. It is nothing personal, just business. The line goes dead. Adrian slams the phone down so viciously that the heavy plastic splinters apart. The ultimate life lesson? Loyalty in a greedy world only lasts exactly as long as your profit margins stay green. The walls are completely closing in on Adrian now. He is suffocating in a panic attack when a timid knock interrupts his misery. His assistant whispers that Paul is back with an absolute emergency. Adrian wants to crawl into a dark corner and rot, but he forces the heavy doors open. Paul stumbles in, looking like a walking ghost, carrying the exhaustion of a man who knows the war is lost. He delivers the fatal blow without blinking. 3 more massive investors just cut their ties, and the board is screaming for blood today. Adrian's knees give out. He collapses into his chair, realizing his stolen empire is turning to ash, and the quiet wife he abandoned is holding the match. A painfully simple life lesson. Everything you build on a fragile foundation of lies and theft is destined to eventually collapse in the dark. Adrian stares blindly, his voice trembling as he whispers her name, Serena. His fragile, quiet ex-wife is the absolute menace slaughtering their legacy. The color instantly drains from Paul's face. He sinks onto the sofa, his hands shaking as the terror sets in. Adrian swears to the empty room that he will find out how she did this and bury her alive. But miles away, watch the beautiful contrast. Serena sits calmly in the soft afternoon light. She studies the leaked files, does the brutal mental math, and quietly agrees to bind her soul to a mafia boss. Alone, she is prey. With Lucian, she is an impenetrable fortress of shadows. The heavy life lesson here: sometimes the smartest move you can ever make is knowing exactly when to swallow your pride and call in the monsters for powerful backup. Picture this scene with me. They seal the deal in a quiet, shadow-draped room. No cascades of white flowers, just 2 brilliant strategists signing a legally binding pact. Lucian takes her hand, sliding a heavy platinum band onto her finger. Serena looks down, remembering the flashy diamond Adrian bought her years ago, the one she pawned when the divorce cleared. But this ring? It feels like a loaded weapon. Lucian offers a knowing smirk, calling her Mrs. Drax. She does not miss a beat, telling him straight up that it is just a title, not who she is. He smiles, respecting that line in the sand entirely. It is a quiet truth we should all remember tonight. You alone define your identity, not the empty names or titles that other people try to pin on your chest. Sit at that dinner table with them. It is the most calculated wedding dinner you could ever witness. They discuss underground connections like they are talking about the weather. Lucian lays out the blueprints of his shadow network, and Serena absorbs every single name, slicing his steak. Lucian warns her that Adrian is going to strike back with a vengeance now that her cover is blown. He asks if she is truly ready for the fallout. Serena looks him dead in the eye, her voice like broken glass, and says she has been ready since the exact second Adrian called her replaceable. Lucian gives a dark, dangerous smile. The storm is coming. Here is a lesson for the late hours. Never call someone replaceable, because they will absolutely return to replace you. Miles away, Adrian is spiraling. He boards a flight to Europe with no bodyguards, driven by the unhinged desperation of a man losing his grip. He rolls up to her quiet apartment, waiting in the damp air like a man haunted by his own ghosts. At noon, Serena steps out. She is not the woman he remembers. She is transformed, carrying a heavy, undeniable authority. Adrian feels his chest seize with sudden panic. He steps into her path, desperate for a reaction. But what he gets is terrifyingly calm. She does not flinch. No fear, no lingering heartbreak, zero emotion. She stares at him like he is a stranger, begging for change on the street. Let this sit with you for a moment. The opposite of love is never hate. It is absolute, stone-cold indifference. He tries the tired excuse that they need to talk, but she shuts him down, brushing right past him. In his arrogance, he actually reaches out and grips her arm. A fatal mistake. Her voice drops to a freezing absolute zero as she orders him never to touch her again. He recoils, hands raised, and finally admits why he is really there. He knows about her new moves. He stands there whining that she is destroying his precious company. Serena just lets out a dry, brutally hollow laugh. His company? She verbally dismantles him right there on the sidewalk. She reminds him of the sleepless nights, the brilliance she bled for while he just smiled and stole all the credit. Here is a hard truth to remember tonight. If you steal the foundation from under someone, do not cry when they come back to demolish the house. Adrian spins desperate lies, but she cuts him off with cold facts. Who coded the algorithm that made his name? Who built the strategy that tripled his wealth? Who wrote the pitch for his first 10 million? Adrian stands there, swallowing hard, paralyzed because he knows the truth. She was the genius behind the curtain. Serena's voice trembles, heavy with years of suffocated rage. She reminds him how he erased her identity, slapped his name on her work, and threw her away with a pathetic settlement. Then she steps into his personal space, entirely unafraid, and drops the final hammer. She whispers that it is perfectly fine, because now she is taking every last piece of it back. Listen closely to this. Karma does not just sting. Sometimes it arrives to completely repossess your entire empire. Witness the destruction unfolding here. Adrian is not just losing a few accounts. He is staring down total ruin. He tries to puff up his chest, demanding that she stop. Her response is chilling. She looks at him with empty eyes, tells him to watch her, and walks away. No theatrics, just the quiet footsteps of a woman taking back her power. Adrian is left frozen on the pavement, hands trembling uncontrollably. He crossed an ocean to intimidate her, but reality is crashing down hard. Seeing her walk away without a glance back, he finally understands. He has already lost the war. Never underestimate the people you stepped on. They spend their silence learning your every weak spot. Meanwhile, Serena avoids going home. She marches straight to Lucian, desperate to hide her own shaking hands. That confrontation dug up some deep ghosts. Seeing Adrian brought all the old trauma rushing back. The humiliation, the suffocating anger, those years of being invisible. She pushes into Lucian's office, and he takes one look at her, reading the quiet panic immediately. Serena sinks into a chair, legs giving out, and confesses that Adrian knows everything. She is terrified, warning that Adrian will play dirty. Lucian does not even blink. He walks over with this calm, terrifying energy, and softly reminds her that she is not fighting alone anymore. Serena is still braced for impact. Lucian just holds her gaze and promises that they can play dirty too. Sometimes the most vital lesson in life is simply learning to let someone else watch your back when the heavy storm finally breaks. Lucian keeps his features still, but there is a dark, predatory flicker in his eyes. Serena nervously asks what he is planning, and he drops a heavy truth. The time for defense is over. They are ending this man permanently. He guides her into a secure room, and the sight inside is breathtaking. The walls are covered in monitors, financial records, and surveillance photos. It is a meticulous map of Adrian's empire, exposing every single flaw. Lucian confesses he has been setting this trap since the first day they met. Adrian walks around thinking he is untouchable, but here is a reality we all face eventually. No matter how powerful someone pretends to be, they always have a glass jaw just waiting to be shattered. Serena stares at the glowing screens, her pulse hammering in her ears. Stick with me, because this is where everything changes. This is no longer just revenge. It is an orchestrated demolition. Serena asks for the final play, and Lucian smiles. They are going to strip Adrian to his bones. Cut to Adrian, walking into his luxury penthouse. He finds his right-hand man, Paul, pacing in a cold sweat. Paul is hyperventilating, shouting that the board is staging a coup, investors are fleeing, and the stock is tanking. Adrian ignores the panic. He slowly pours a drink, and Izzy mentions that he just saw Serena. Paul freezes, the blood draining from his face, as Adrian bitterly admits she is coming for his head. The lesson here is hauntingly clear. True arrogance completely blinds you to the fact that your own karma is already twisting the handle on your front door. Adrian realizes Serena will not rest until his empire is ash. Paul collapses onto the sofa, begging to know what Adrian did to incur this wrath. Ever the narcissist, Adrian plays the victim, claiming it is just a bitter divorce. Something inside Paul snaps. He screams the brutal truth. He yells that Adrian stole her work for years, fed off her genius, and threw her away. Adrian's face hardens. He demands blind loyalty, asking whose side Paul is on. But Paul is done. He refuses to sink with this ship, just because Adrian could not control his fragile ego. Adrian coldly points to the door, banishing his only friend. Let this be a warning. If you build your life on toxic betrayal, do not act shocked when your closest allies jump ship the second the heavy rain starts. The door slams, leaving Adrian alone in the silence of his penthouse. The 0-degree fury in Serena's eyes haunts him. Reality sets in like poison. She is not bluffing. She is going to wipe his name from the earth. For the first time, this arrogant man has no idea how to survive. 3 weeks later, the guillotine drops. Serena and Lucian execute a flawless strike. Lucian unleashes his legal team, hitting Adrian with a massive lawsuit for stolen intellectual property. In the same breath, Serena launches a savage hostile takeover, scooping up his devalued stock while the board descends into total panic. A piece of midnight wisdom for you. Your past mistakes do not just fade away. They wait quietly in the dark, ready to strike when you are at your absolute weakest. The corporate world fractures. Investors run for the exits, and clients shred contracts. In 72 hours, Adrian watches helplessly as he loses control of his stolen empire. He sits frozen in his office, staring blankly at the termination papers on his desk. Relieved of duties, effective immediately, brutal. His phone vibrates endlessly, but he is too numb to answer. Finally, he picks up. His assistant is on the line, whispering that someone is here. It is Serena. Adrian's heart stops his chest. He desperately tries to order his assistant to block the door, but the heavy glass swings open before the words leave his throat. Let this sit with you tonight. You can build your walls as high as you want, but eventually, the consequences of your actions will just walk right through your front door. Picture this. The heavy doors swing open, and Serena steps in. Beside her is Lucian Drax, a phantom in tailored silk who pulls the strings of both the corporate skyline and the brutal underground. Serena locks eyes with Adrian, and for the first time she smiles. It is a frozen, fatal greeting. Adrian sits there, breath knocked out of his lungs. Lucian steps forward, dropping a thick leather folder onto the desk. "Terms," he says softly. Adrian stammers, his voice cracking in raw panic. Serena leans in, demanding his total surrender. "Sign the shares away and vanish, or lose everything. Stick with me, because the lesson is absolute. The people you use as stepping stones to climb will eventually become the heavy boulders that crush you." Adrian just stares, his reality fracturing piece by piece. This is the woman he kept on a leash, the ghost he erased from his hollow success story. He whispers that she cannot do this, but Serena delivers the killing blow. She already has. Lucian slowly flips open the folder, revealing a graveyard of Adrian's sins. Every stolen concept, every redirected email, 7 agonizing years of theft laid bare. Lucian slides a silver pen across the wood. The ultimatum is quiet but lethal. Sign, or the press gets everything by midnight. Adrian is trembling violently, his vision blurring. Looking into Serena's hollow eyes, the true horror sets in. He built his own executioner. It is a harsh truth we all face. Every toxic seed you bury in someone else's life will eventually sprout into a dark forest that traps you completely. His hand hovers above the silver pen, fingers twitching in a desperate refusal to obey. His brain screams at him to sign, to end the suffocating nightmare, but his body rejects the defeat like swallowed poison. Every muscle locks into a stubborn rebellion. Across the desk, Serena stands like a statue carved from ice, wearing a mask of terrifying satisfaction. Beside her, Lucian waits. He is patient as a graveyard, watching the cold sweat trace down Adrian's pale face. Lucian's voice barely breaks a whisper as he grants exactly 60 seconds. If the ink does not dry, the journalists feast tomorrow. Adrian's throat tightens, completely choking off his air. When you spend your entire life backing good people into dark corners, it is a devastating shock to the system when you finally run out of room yourself. Adrian looks down at the mountain of paper, each page a heavy nail in his coffin. He sees the places where he erased Serena's existence to build his own throne. 7 years of methodical betrayal, now sharpened into a blade aimed right at his throat. In a final pathetic act of manipulation, he whispers that he made her who she is. Serena's voice slices through the heavy air, unforgiving. She reminds him that he stole everything. Her algorithms, her late-night breakthroughs, her client trust. He slapped his name on her genius and paraded as a prodigy. And the most agonizing part? She openly admits she let him do it. Sometimes the hardest life lesson comes from looking in the mirror. We hand over the keys to our own power just because we desperately want to believe the promises of a smooth liar. Serena looks down at him, her eyes reflecting nothing but pure disgust. She confesses that she actually believed his lies, believed they were building an empire together as equals. A hollow laugh escapes her lips as she calls herself a fool for trusting a parasite. She commands him to sign, and Adrian shatters. His hand finally moves because the trap has snapped shut. He drags the pen across the paper, each stroke tearing a piece of his pride away. He drops the pen, completely hollow inside. Lucian smoothly gathers the documents, clicking the folder shut, and casually congratulates Adrian on his permanent irrelevance. Let this sink in deeply. Blindly trusting a manipulator will bleed away your best years. But the moment you fiercely take your power back, you become entirely unstoppable. As they turn to leave, Adrian's broken voice echoes in the quiet room. He asks if destroying their shared empire was really worth it. Serena stops at the threshold. She turns slowly, and there is no triumph in her eyes, just absolute, freezing zero. She stares at the ruined man and delivers the heaviest blow of the night. They built nothing, she whispers. She built the empire, and he was just the thief who took the bow. With a slight tilt of her head, she confirms that burning his fake kingdom to ash was worth every painful second. The door clicks shut, echoing like a final gunshot. Adrian sits alone in an office that no longer belongs to him, as his phone vibrates with panic. Remember this well. If you do not fiercely protect the value of your own hard work, a vulture will gladly steal your crown. Adrian does not even glance at the flashing screen. He sits paralyzed, the silence pressing down on his chest. Everything he stole is gone. The sickness twisting in his stomach comes from one devastating truth: he brought this entirely on himself. Down on the street, there is no celebration. Serena slides into the quiet luxury of Lucian's car, staring blankly at the passing city lights. She executed her master plan. The enemy is dead in the water, yet her chest feels like a hollow cavern. Lucian watches her from the shadows of the back seat, noting that most people would be drinking champagne after ruining their abuser. Serena just clenches her jaw. You and I both know the hardest lesson of revenge. Burning down the painful past does not automatically lay the bricks for your future. The tension shifts gears entirely when Serena quietly admits she is not like most people. The car pulls up to Lucian's towering headquarters, a fortress of black glass and cold steel that seems to swallow the moonlight. They ride the private elevator to his penthouse, the silence hanging between them like a loaded weapon. Serena has been hiding in his guest room since they forged their fake marriage, convincing herself this was just a clean business transaction. But the cold reality is setting in fast. You cannot dance with the devil and expect to walk away without smelling like smoke. The environment you choose will always shape your soul. Lucian walks over to the crystal decanter, pours a slow drink, and without looking back, tells her it is time to discuss what happens next. Lucian swirls his glass, his voice steady. He reminds her that while Adrian is broken, his loyal wolves still sit on the corporate board. But Serena is already moving. She slides a tablet across the counter, revealing a heavily vetted list of replacements. The board is handled. Lucian pauses, genuine surprise flickering in his dark eyes at her ruthless efficiency. Then the air grows heavy. Exhaustion washes over Serena. She looks at this dangerous man and asks what he actually wants from her. Lucian claims he just wanted to watch Adrian burn. Serena pushes back Adrian is ash. So, what is the endgame? Lucian locks eyes with her, takes a slow sip, and whispers, "Now you rebuild." The lesson is undeniable. Destroying your enemies is just the prologue. The true revenge is building your own empire from the ashes. He commands her to take back the stolen company and turn it into an impenetrable fortress under her own name. When she questions his motive, Lucian drops a phrase that chills the room. He says he always protects his investments. He lets the silence drag before adding, and he protects his wife. The word hangs in the freezing air, heavy and suffocating. It was supposed to be a piece of paper, a weapon forged for pure revenge. But standing in his towering penthouse, a new terror grips her heart. Has she simply traded a weak tyrant for a lethal one? It is a dangerous truth we often ignore. When you invite a monster in to scare away the wolves, you now have to live with the monster. Overwhelmed, she turns to flee to her room, but his deep voice stops her. "You did well today," he says softly. He tells her he hopes she realizes her own strength, but Serena offers nothing in return. She retreats into the quiet of her suite, agonizing over why absolute victory tastes exactly like defeat. We shift away from the penthouse to Adrian's complete descent into madness. For 3 agonizing days, he does not see the sun. He drowns himself in liquor, waking up on hardwood floors with shattered memories and the rotting taste of failure. The truth of human suffering is simple. Trying to drown your mistakes in a bottle only ensures the demons learn how to swim, making the hangover of reality completely merciless. By the fourth morning, a relentless pounding echoes against Adrian's front door. Looking like a walking ghost, he drags his aching body across the floor to face whoever is interrupting his miserable isolation. Adrian pulls the door open, and standing there is Paul. He looks like he carried the weight of a decade over the last 7 days. Paul takes one look at his former boss and bluntly tells him he looks like absolute death. Adrian offers a dry, sarcastic remark, leaning heavily against the frame. Paul pushes past him, disgusted by the suffocating smell of stale alcohol and a broken ego. Without a word of sympathy, Paul marches to the wall and violently yanks the curtains apart. Blinding sunlight floods the room. Adrian flinches, shielding his eyes like a wounded animal. But Paul refuses to let him hide, demanding Adrian look at the pathetic shell he has become. Let me share a hard truth with you. You can never heal in the same dark room where you broke down. Sometimes you need a loyal friend to rip the curtains open, even when the light burns. Paul paces the dimly lit room, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. He tells Adrian to quit drowning in misery and fight back. Adrian just lets out a hollow, broken laugh, sounding like a man whose entire world is already in ashes. But Paul refuses to let it go. He pulls out his phone and reveals a truth that makes Adrian's blood run cold. Lucian Drax is not just some polished corporate executive. He is secretly running a vast criminal underworld, knee-deep in extortion and dirty money. Paul warns him that Serena is tangled up with a literal monster. Listen to me on this one. There is a simple truth we all have to face. No matter how deep the dark secrets are buried, the truth always leaves a paper trail, and nobody is ever truly untouchable if you just keep digging. Adrian feels a cold panic grip his chest. The realization hits him hard. Exposing Lucian means Serena gets caught right in the deadly crossfire. Paul glares at him, frustration boiling over, reminding Adrian that this woman destroyed his legacy. But Adrian just lets out a slow breath and drops a heavy confession. She only took back what rightfully belonged to her. Sinking onto the couch, he admits the ugly truth. He stole her life's work, slapped his own name on it, and faked his entire journey to the top. Paul stands there completely frozen, shocked that his friend's defending the enemy. It brings up a hard lesson we all must learn. You can never truly move forward in this life until you look in the mirror and take full accountability for the messes you created. The board is set, and the next move will change everything. Adrian looks up, his eyes hollow and completely defeated. He whispers that she already won, and maybe she deserved to. Paul looks absolutely sick to his stomach, spitting back that the man he knew would never just roll over Adrian, slowly rises to his feet, his voice dead serious, and admits that the old version of him was nothing but a total fraud. Disgusted, Paul shakes his head, tells him to drown in his own guilt, and storms out. The heavy door slams so violently that the expensive paintings shudder. Adrian is left standing in the center of his massive, empty penthouse, surrounded by the quiet ruins of his fake life. It is a harsh reality we all have to face eventually. Your ego might carry you all the way to the top of the mountain, but it will leave you freezing and completely alone once you finally get there. Let's cross town and check in on Serena, shall we? She is sitting in her immaculate office, reviewing the financials for her reclaimed empire. But a strange series of offshore transactions catches her eye. On paper, they look completely legitimate, but her gut instinct starts screaming, She digs deeper, pulling file after file, and feels the floor drop out from under her. The money is moving in quiet, perfectly timed waves, staying just barely out of sight. Then the terrifying realization hits her. It is the exact same shady playbook her enemies used. Her own company is being quietly drained from the inside out. It is a bitter pill to swallow. If you bend the rules and cheat the system to win the game, you cannot be shocked when somebody else uses those exact same cheat codes to rob you entirely blind. Serena is suffocating in pure panic. She immediately calls Lucian, demanding a meeting, and soon she is slamming those damning papers onto his pristine desk. She screams at him to explain it. Lucian does not even flinch. He sits there completely ice cold. She points out with a trembling hand that these sketchy transfers date back to long before they even met. Her heart is hammering against her ribs, but this man just leans back, steeples his fingers, and offers a dark smirk. He tells her he is impressed she caught it. He was targeting Adrian long before Serena ever entered the picture, claiming he absolutely despises thieves. Here is a thought to keep you safe in the dark. Never trust a shark just because it happens to be eating your enemy. Give it enough time, and it will inevitably turn around and take a bite right out of you. Luke Hagen casually drops a devastating truth. He has been systematically dismantling Adrian for an entire year. Serena feels the air leave her lungs, demanding to know why he even bothered marrying her. Lucian looks at her with a lifeless smile and says she simply made the job easier. He used her deep desire for revenge as a convenient smokescreen. To the world, it looked like a bitter ex taking her company back, hiding his massive criminal takeover in plain sight. Serena collapses into a chair, shaking uncontrollably as she realizes she was nothing but a pawn in his dark game. Lucian coldly reminds her that they used each other. She got her revenge, and he got his money. The takeaway here is brutal but necessary. If a deal seems way too good to be true, you are probably not the one making the deal. You are actually just the product being sold on the shelf. Stick with me here, because we need to unpack this terrifying moment together. Serena looks around and finally realizes she is locked inside a gilded cage. Lucian hits her with a chilling reality check, telling her that freedom is just a myth. She simply traded her normal chains for heavier ones. Her legs tremble as she demands to be let out of this toxic marriage. But Lucian just lets out a low, pitying laugh. He gently reminds her that her signature is already stamped on every single shady document. If his empire burns to the ground, she goes right down into the ashes with him. He steps in close, the air turning ice cold. She begged for the sweet taste of revenge, and now the massive bill has arrived. It is a timeless lesson. When you willingly make dark deals with absolute villains just to get even, you will always end up paying the ultimate price. Serena balls her hands into fists, her knuckles white from pure rage. She wants to strike him, but the cold truth paralyzes her. She is totally trapped. Lucian played her from the very first day. She believed she was the mastermind, but he had her dancing on a string all along. Her voice sounds hollow as she begs for air. Lucian smugly advises her to breathe, softly warning her not to pull any foolish stunts now that they are partners. She stumbles blindly out of his office, her mind spinning as the hallway walls seem to close in on her. She barely makes it to the elevator before her legs give out, gasping for oxygen. She successfully ruined Adrian, but she handed her own soul to a true monster. The lesson here is harsh but unavoidable. If you spend your life digging a deep grave for your enemy, you must be fully prepared to fall into the dark dirt yourself. Let's cut through the night to Adrian, waking up to a midnight phone call. The man is wrecked, passed out on his couch with an empty bottle beside him. He has truly hit rock bottom. The phone vibrates, and he almost ignores it until that familiar number flashes across the screen. He answers, and Serena's trembling voice hits him like freezing water. He shoots straight up, heart hammering, demanding to know what she wants. She whispers a frantic warning that they are both in massive trouble and will get wiped out if they do not team up. Adrian clenches his jaw, bitter, claiming he does not believe a single word. Serena drops a time and a place, noon at the cafe, and tells him to come alone before the line goes dead. Here is a crucial life lesson. Never burn a bridge so completely that you cannot run back across it when a deadly storm arrives at your door. You and I are going to unpack this massive twist together. Adrian is staring at his phone like it is a ticking time bomb. He is convinced this meeting is a trap, just another twisted mind game from his ex and her new Mafia husband. But the thing that keeps gnawing at him is the sound of her voice on that call. It was raw with pure, unfiltered panic. Adrian pulls an all-nighter and finally steps into the packed cafe. He finds her huddled in a corner booth, clutching a cold coffee, her eyes darting over her shoulder like a hunted animal. He sits down, demanding answers, and she drops the absolute nuke. Lucian has secretly been destroying Adrian's company since way before the divorce even happened. It really just goes to show a powerful truth. You never truly know who is quietly pulling the strings in the dark until the blinding lights finally come on. Adrian sits there, absolutely sick to his stomach as the reality sets in. Serena breaks it down, tears in her tired eyes as she confesses that Lucian played her like a cheap fiddle. She thought she was the brilliant mastermind taking Adrian down, but she was just a shiny distraction to hide the real crime. Lucian had the board rigged from the first day. Adrian is reeling, asking why she is suddenly spilling all this dangerous information. Serena looks him dead in the eye and whispers that Lucian is not going to stop. He swallows companies whole, and now she is legally tied to his criminal empire. She thought she was getting her payback, but she traded a bad situation for a total nightmare. Honestly, revenge is a toxic drink that always poisons you first. Adrian just laughs bitterly in her face. Help her, she has got to be completely out of her mind. Serena is not playing around anymore. She leans across the table and reveals she actually has the receipts. We are talking undeniable evidence of Lucian's massive money laundering operations. It is enough to lock the Mafia boss away forever. But there is a deadly catch. If she leaks the files alone, Lucian will know it was her and wipe her off the map. Adrian looks at her like she has two heads. The exact woman who stole his entire life is now begging for his protection. It is hilarious in the darkest, most twisted way possible. He asks why he should trust a snake, and she gives him the raw truth. They both know what it feels like to be broken by someone they loved. Sometimes, the only way to survive a terrifying common enemy is to team up with your worst rival. Still, every single fiber of his being is screaming at him to turn around and run. Despite the bitter blood between them, Adrian looks at Serena and still sees the ghost of the girl he once loved. He actually sits down and listens. When he asks for her plan, the venom in her eyes washes away, replaced by a fragile hope. For 2 weeks, they vanish into the city's underbelly, building a case to bury Lucian alive. She smuggles out the dark ledgers and emails, proving her husband's and criminal empire, while Adrian reaches to. You and I know this is walking a tightrope over an open grave. If Lucian finds out, they are dead. But sometimes, taking a massive risk is the only real way to shatter a vicious cycle of abuse. Serena even flees that suffocating penthouse, simply to buy them a single breath of stolen air. Lucien does not even lift a finger to stop her from walking out the door. He just sits there in his leather chair, endlessly amused, watching her like a cruel child observing a trapped mouse in a maze. He leaves her with a freezing warning, whispering that the world is a very dangerous place for a woman all alone. The threat echoes in her bones. So, Serena and Adrian become ghosts. They meet in damp concrete parking garages and cheap motels under fake names. The air between them is so heavy you could choke on it. Yet, in the quiet dark, they start to sync up again. Then, the dam finally breaks. Adrian's voice shatters as he begs for her forgiveness, apologizing for stealing her thunder all those years ago. It takes genuine bravery to confess your worst sins, especially when the scars have already healed over. Adrian confesses the darkest truth of all. He knows his betrayal pushed her straight into the arms of a monster like Lucien. Serena sits there, her face as cold as carved stone. She whispers that it is far too late for apologies, but the words hang in the air anyway. She turns back to the glowing screen of her laptop, though her hands tremble so badly she can barely type. She insists his regret changes absolutely nothing, and he silently nods. They work in the quiet motel room, but the bitter ice between them is melting. It is not forgiveness, but the sad realization that they were both destroyed by their own ruthless ambition. Shared pain has a strange way of bridging the widest gaps. Then, a normal Thursday shatters everything. Serena walks in to find Adrian, pale as death, holding out a phone with a message. The text glowing on the screen is pure dread. It is a promise that if they do not stop, every single person they love will end up buried. The sender is anonymous, but they both feel Lucien smiling from the shadows. Serena tries to brush it off as an empty threat, but her entire body is trembling. Adrian looks her in the eye and asks the hardest question, questioning if a man like Lucien ever really bluffs. If the crime boss already knows they are working together, their entire case could be ruined. Panic sets in, and Serena insists they must hand the files over to the prosecutors right now. Waiting too long, when danger is at your door, is always a fatal mistake. Suddenly, her own phone begins to ring. It is him. Adrian grabs her wrist, pleading, but she answers anyway. Lucien speaks, and his voice is perfectly calm. Lucien does not yell. He softly demands that his wife come home right now for a quiet talk. Then the line goes dead. The silence left behind in that cheap motel room is heavy enough to crush them. Adrian is pacing, his chest heaving, begging her not to walk blindly into an obvious snare. But Serena understands the grim reality of her marriage. If she runs, Lucien will slaughter them both. Adrian wants to throw whatever evidence they have at the police, but it is just not ready. Acting on a half-baked plan when the stakes are life and death will only get you burned. So, she makes the ultimate sacrifice. She stands tall, telling him she has to face the devil herself. She gives Adrian exactly 2 hours. If she does not return, he must leak it all. In that moment, he finally sees the fearless woman he lost. Adrian stares into that relentless fire in her eyes, the very same fire he once tried to put out, and softly swears he will finish what they started. Serena walks out of that peeling motel door, gets behind the wheel, and drives straight back into the lion's den. She knows in her very soul that this is a fatal trap waiting to snap shut. Still, life teaches us a hard truth. Sometimes, the only way out of the fire is to walk right through the center of the flames. She steps out of the elevator into the penthouse, but the vast space is swallowed by darkness. No lights, no sound, just towering shadows bleeding across the marble. She calls his name into the void. His voice slithers back from the gloom. He is waiting in the dark, slowly swirling a heavy glass of amber liquor, and he softly commands her to sit down. You and I both know she is walking barefoot on a razor's edge here. Serena refuses to take the seat, her voice steady as she demands to know what he wants. Lucien remains dangerously quiet, casually asking why his beautiful wife has been hiding in the dark with her former lover. She tries to feign confusion, but he slams his glass onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He moves closer, bragging about the eyes he has hiding in every shadow. Did she honestly believe she could dig a grave for a crime lord right inside his own house? Her heart is battering against her ribs, but her face remains carved from ice. She lies, claiming she was simply tying up old debts. Keeping your composure when the world is ending is the ultimate survival skill. Lucien studies her cold face, then stretches his lips into a terrible smile. Lucien decides to play a final twisted game. He offers her one single chance to confess exactly what she handed over to her old flame. Serena fiercely denies sharing a single word, but she chose the wrong answer. Before she can even draw a breath, Lucien lunges. He moves with the terrifying speed of a starved predator. In his heartbeat, his massive hand is locked around her throat, slamming her spine against the cold wall. He does not crush her windpipe, just applies enough pressure to make the terror bloom. He leans in close, his breath on her cheek, asking the question one more time. The sad truth is, you can never negotiate with monsters when they hold your life in their hands. The edges of her vision turn dark as she claws at his iron fingers, swearing her innocence. He finally lets go, watching her gasp on the floor. Lucien coldly pulls a phone from his pocket and whispers two simple, bone-chilling words into the receiver. The heavy mahogany doors swing wide, and two absolute mountains of men step inside. These are the hollow-eyed enforcers who make people disappear in the middle of the night. Lucien quietly orders them to haul her up to his remote estate and lock her away forever. Serena feels her blood turn to frost. She begs him, pleading for mercy, but he merely smiles, telling her she made this bed and now she will die in it. Every choice carries a bitter consequence, and betraying a kingpin demands the highest toll. The massive men grab her violently, lifting her off the floor like a rag doll. She kicks and screams, offering him anything he wants. But Lucien simply turns away. He takes another sip of his scotch, entirely unmoved. As the polished metal elevator doors seal shut, a wave of nausea washes over Serena. The awful truth hits her deep in the gut. She has made the exact same tragic mistake twice in one lifetime. She gave her trust to a man who only wanted to own her. It is a painful reminder that closing your eyes to the red flags will always lead you straight into the abyss. And this time, no divorce lawyer can pull her out. They drive her far past the city limits, deep into an isolated forest where no one can hear a scream. Under the pale moon, the sprawling estate looks less like a mansion and more like a tomb. She sits trembling in the back, the hard plastic of zip ties biting into her bruised wrists. The brutes in the front seat do not speak. One steers the car in dead silence, while the other slowly drags a hunting knife under his fingernails. Her only connection to the outside world is gone. The enforcers stripped away her phone the second they shoved her into the vehicle. As the miles roll by in the dark, she prays that Adrian is watching the clock. She wonders if he will actually find the courage to hand that damning evidence over, or if he will run and hide to save his own skin. Placing your survival in another person's hands is the most terrifying gamble a human being can make. The tires crunch loudly onto a long gravel path, and the massive stone house emerges from the heavy fog. Let me be clear with you folks, This is the kind of fortress where bad things happen in the dark. The doors open, and they yank her out into the bitter cold. Her numb legs give out, but the guard jerks her upward, his thick fingers digging into her flesh as he orders her to move. They drag her across a gleaming marble foyer, decorated with priceless paintings, but the illusion of luxury fades fast. They push her down a dark corridor and throw her into a cold, stone room. The only thing inside is a heavy metal chair bolted straight into the concrete floor. The enforcer forces her down, snapping thick iron cuffs around her wrists until they cut into her skin. He leans in, promising that the boss will be here soon, and then the heavy steel door slams shut, locking her in the dark. The silence in the room is suffocating. The sickening smell of damp stone and dried blood fills her lungs. She fights like a wild animal, tearing her wrists against the metal, but the chains hold firm. Her breath comes in jagged gasps. It just goes to show, all that glittering wealth on the outside usually hides a terrifying nightmare within. Panic rises in Serena's throat, but she swallows it down. In this dark world, losing your nerve is the fastest way to lose your life. The heavy door swings open, and Lucian steps into the dim light. He is immaculate in his tailored suit, looking down at her with hollow, dead eyes, as if she is just broken machinery. The lock clicks shut. He starts spinning lies, claiming he gave her money, protection, and the perfect revenge, only to be betrayed. Serena does not flinch. She stares right into the abyss of his gaze, calling out his deceit. He merely smiles, whispering that they only used each other for their own broken desires. It is a harsh truth we all must face eventually. Never expect genuine loyalty from someone who only views you as a replaceable tool. Lucian drags a heavy chair across the floor and sits down, completely relaxed. He tells her she got too greedy, digging into his buried sins and teaming up with her ex to tear down his empire. Serena's voice cuts through the dark. She tells him there was never an us to begin with. Lucian flashes a slow, freezing smile. He reminds her they are legally married, and her rebellion damages his pristine name. Looking him dead in the eye, she asks if he is going to end life tonight. He leans in close, whispering that killing her would be a terrible waste. Instead, she will smile for the cameras and run the company as his obedient puppet. It reminds us of a bitter reality. When you decide to play dangerous games with a true monster, simply walking away is never an option. He tells her to drop the illusion and accept that she is nothing more than a tool. Serena's jaw clenches, but her pride refuses to break. She asks what happens if she says no. Lucian does not even blink. He calmly promises to destroy Adrian and every single soul she holds dear. The true horror is that he would keep her alive, locked in this dark cell to drown in the guilt. He casually brushes a speck of dust from his sleeve, offering her one single night to choose. The heavy door slams shut, plunging her into suffocating darkness. Her heart hammers wildly against her ribs as she sits alone in the cold. It is a painful lesson we often learn too late. Never let a monster see who you truly love, because they will undeniably use those people as their ultimate leverage against you. You and I know the terrible feeling of pure helplessness. Serena yanks at the heavy cuffs until her wrists bleed and her muscles shake with exhaustion. It is no use. She is trapped, and Adrian has no idea where she is. Miles away, Adrian is losing his mind. He checks his watch for the 15th time. 3 solid hours. He paces the cheap motel room like a caged animal. 17 calls, all sent straight to the cold void of voicemail. She is a ghost, he curses into the empty room, gripping their thick folder of evidence. It is the ultimate proof that Lucian rules a massive underground mafia empire. This brings us to a simple but brutal reality check. When you decide to aggressively poke a dangerous beast, you better make sure you have a solid escape route planned before it wakes up. The files are heavy with secrets, enough to draw the law, but not enough to bury Lucian forever. They need Serena alive to testify. Adrian sits on the bed, his hands shaking. The original plan was to run to the police if she vanished. But dropping that bomb now means Lucian will silence her in a heartbeat. Adrian knows how these ruthless predators operate. He realizes he cannot win this fight alone. He needs serious backup. Scrolling through his contacts, his thumb stops on a ghost from his past. Marcus Hale, the legendary investigator who first tracked Serena down, a man who unearths the darkest buried secrets. He takes a breath and hits dial. It teaches us something vital about desperation. Knowing exactly when to swallow your pride and call for help is the ultimate survival skill. You and I know this is a massive gamble. Marcus answers, surprised. He coldly reminds Adrian their business ended the day Adrian fired him. But desperation takes over, and Adrian immediately offers triple the rate in cash. Marcus pauses, then asks for the target. Adrian drops the heavy truth. He needs to rescue someone from the grip of Lucian. The silence stretches so long, Adrian thinks the line went dead. Finally, Marcus calls him completely insane. Going after a mafia boss is a guaranteed death wish. Adrian's voice breaks as he confesses the hostage is Serena. Marcus is stunned, reminding Adrian how much he used to despise ex-wife. Adrian presses a sweaty palm to his eyes, drowning in regret. The lesson here is profound. Money can buy many dangerous favors, but it cannot easily buy raw courage when facing a true monster. Adrian chokes on his words, admitting it is his fault. They partnered to expose the crime lord, and Lucian caught them. If Serena dies, her blood stains his hands forever. Marcus sharpens his voice, demanding to know what kind of radioactive nightmare Adrian begs him to find her, promising the story later. Marcus sighs and demands every scrap of intel on Lucian. The properties, the goons, everything. But he lays down one strict rule. He needs a full 72 hours. Adrian panics, swearing she might not survive 3 days. Marcus delivers the cold reality. Rushing in blind is a guaranteed game over for everyone. Defeated, Adrian closes his eyes and accepts the terms. He collapses onto the bed, the evidence folder feeling like a stone on his chest. It brings us to a haunting truth. True guilt is absolutely the heaviest baggage you will ever carry. Adrian realizes he has to buy time. He needs to pull off a massively reckless stunt, something loud enough to drag Lucian's dark gaze away from Serena. He violently flips open his laptop and starts plotting. Meanwhile, deep in the cold dungeon, rough hands shake Serena awake. She gasps, her neck screaming in agony from passing out in that rusted chair. The emotionless driver stands over her, demanding a meeting with the boss. As the heavy cuffs click open, Serena's legs give out. She practically face plants against the freezing floor. Her hands are completely numb, her shoulders burning with fire. The guard forcefully hauls her up, dragging her weak body out of the nightmare room and up the stairs. This reveals a tragic reality. Sometimes you literally have to set your own world on fire just to keep someone else safe from the real monsters. Blinding morning light stabs at her exhausted eyes as they drag her into the opulent dining room. There sits Lucian at the head of a massive mahogany table. This monster is casually eating eggs and toast as if he did not just shatter her world. The smell of food makes Serena's empty stomach twist in knots. Lucian gestures with a silver fork, ordering her to sit. She collapses into the chair, her trembling legs giving out. The guard remains planted behind her like a shadow of death. Lucian slices his breakfast with surgical precision. He calmly asks if she has considered him. Serena fires back, her voice defiant, calling it what it truly is, a threat. Lucian just smirks, chewing slowly before demanding her final answer. Her throat feels like crushed glass. It is a sickening life lesson. A pure evil never takes a day off. It just puts on a fancy tailored suit to enjoy a nice morning breakfast. Every fiber of her being screams to spit in his arrogant face. But the faces of innocent people flash in her mind. If she fights, they die. With her spirit crumbling, she quietly surrenders, agreeing to become his puppet. Lucian rewards her with a sickening smile, bragging that he knew she would see reason. But Serena clings to one last demand. She insists he let Adrian go free, promising to bury the dangerous evidence. The smile slides right off Lucian's face before clatters against the china. He mocks her for caring about her ex. Serena holds her ground, claiming she just wants to keep her word. Lucian leans back, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. He reveals that Adrian just made her deal entirely impossible. Serena's blood turns to ice. What on earth did Adrian do? Lucian taps his phone, sliding it across the table to show her the damage. The lesson is brutal. Surrendering your own life never actually guarantees your loved ones are safe. Let us look at this together. Rich. Lucian pushes the glowing screen toward her, and the headline is an absolute heart-stopper. It is total exposure. Tech genius Adrian Lockhart has officially accused Lucien Drax of a massive criminal conspiracy. The photograph shows Adrian on the courthouse steps. He looks shattered, but his eyes hold a terrifying resolve. He just leaked every dark secret, the money laundering, the fraud, the brutal extortion. It is all bleeding across the internet. Lucien whispers, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm, that Adrian went public 3 hours ago. The district attorney is already swarming. Serena cannot breathe. The room spins. This was never part of the plan. Adrian broke the quiet deal, which means Lucien is about to break his. It proves a terrifying point. Sometimes the biggest risks you take are the ones that force the real monsters to finally show their true colors. Lucien buttons his jacket, his movements slow and utterly devoid of mercy. He looks into Serena's eyes and delivers the verdict: Adrian is a dead man walking. He signals his heavy muscle to drag her back to the dark. But you and I know Serena better than that, do we not? The second rough hands grab her. She tears free and lunges across the table. Snatching a serrated knife, she aims straight for his throat. But Lucien is a ghost. He catches her wrist effortlessly, twisting until the metal clatters away, easily blocking her desperate strike. A brutal backhand sends her crashing to the cold floor, her vision shattering. Listen closely to the midnight hour. Anger might burn bright enough to start a fire, but the cold ice of strategy will always extinguish blind rage. Serena tastes bitter copper as blood pools in her mouth. The guard hauls her up, and the physical fight drains from her limbs. Her body is broken, but her mind races through the dark. Adrian has forced the ultimate showdown. Lucien is sending his killers out right now. She is trapped while the only man who tried to save her walks into a massacre. Far away at the courthouse, flashbulbs explode like lightning. Reporters shove microphones into Adrian's face. A disgraced tech genius is stepping up to take down an untouchable mob boss. A voice from the crowd demands to know if he has the proof to back up this death wish. It is a heavy truth of the late night. Sometimes, being a real friend means stepping willingly into the roaring fire so someone else can breathe. Adrian stares into the cameras, his voice dead steady. He confirms, handing a massive dossier to the district attorney. Financial logs, buried secrets, and terrified witnesses, the final nails for the Don's coffin. Asked why now, his answer is chilling. Lucien Drax is a plague, and innocent blood will spill if he is not stopped. A reporter shouts a painful question about his ex-wife marrying the mob boss. Adrian clenches his jaw against the ghosts of his past. He mutters no comment and forces his way into the getaway car. Marcus, his driver, stares with pure dread, warning Adrian he just painted a fatal target on his own back. Adrian offers a tragic smirk. That was exactly the plan. Marcus heavily grips the wheel and peels into traffic. Listen, sometimes you must turn your own life into bleeding bait to protect the one heart you still truly care about. Inside the car, Marcus is quietly losing his mind. Offering yourself as human bait for a Mafia boss is a death sentence. But Adrian calmly explains the tragic math of his choice. It is the only way to pull Lucien's deadly gaze away from Serena. If Adrian falls, Marcus must ensure the law finishes the war. As the city lights blur past, Adrian desperately asks if they have found Serena. Marcus admits he narrowed it to 3 remote estates, but needs more time. Suddenly, his phone vibrates with a text that drains the color from his face. An underground contact just confirmed the absolute worst. Lucien's heavily armed hit squads are officially unleashed, speeding straight into the city to hunt them down. Remember this, true loyalty is rarely convenient. Real courage means holding your ground in the dark when the hungry wolves are finally let off their chains. Marcus shakes as he warns the hitmen are under an hour away, coming straight for them. Adrian's pulse hammers, yet he demands the address for the safe house. Marcus gives the coordinates 40 minutes in the opposite direction. Adrian instantly orders him to pull over. Panic rises in Marcus, swearing Adrian cannot survive alone. But Adrian reveals the twist of his plan. With Lucien pouring his main army into the city, the remote estate will be left exposed. It is a perfect tactical blind spot. Adrian looks his driver dead in the eye, stating, "They are doing this together." Marcus is the only soul he trusts to pull Serena from the shadows. The late night teaches us a harsh truth. When your entire world shatters, you learn very quickly who will stand beside you to pick up the broken glass. You and I know this feeling well. Marcus stares at Adrian, torn between terror and loyalty. He curses, stating this reckless mission will get them killed. Adrian casually agrees it probably will. With a resigned sigh, Marcus violently jerks the wheel, flipping the car around. He demands a full year of pay if they survive this suicide run. Adrian agrees without skipping a beat. Bright city lights bleed into dark, suffocating woods as the screen ticks down the miles. Adrian's chest pounds. He has zero plan to breach this fortress. He only knows Serena risked her life for his. Sometimes doing the right thing means stepping blindly into the absolute dark, even without a safety net to catch your tragic fall. Let us step back into the shadows with Serena, fighting a desperate war in a cold cell. She grinds her wrists against the handcuffs until her skin is slick with blood. But the steel refuses to yield. Trapped in the dark, her mind circles back to Adrian's reckless press conference. It was a beautiful sacrifice, but Lucien will torture him for it. Serena knows she will be forced to watch his agony unless she finds a way out. She scans the suffocating room with wild desperation. Cold concrete, thick stone, and one tiny window mocking her from above. There is absolutely nothing to use as a weapon. That is, until her tired eyes lock onto the heavy chair she is cuffed to. Listen closely. When the obvious options vanish into thin air, you must find the strength to become your own weapon. bound to a chair bolted into the concrete. Serena spots dark rust around the base. The bolts are rotting. She stands as far as the restraints allow and violently throws her weight sideways. The chair shifts, but holds. Refusing to break, she slams her bruised body against it repeatedly. On the fourth hit, the metal screams. The left bolt shifts. She hurls herself at the frame, ignoring the agony in her shoulders. Finally, with a crack like a live gunshot, the rusted bolt snaps. Serena crashes to the floor, dragging the heavy wood. The right bolt is stuck, but now she has leverage. She plants her feet against the stone wall and pulls with all her might. Hard work pays off, my friends, even when it feels like your arms are tearing right out of their sockets. The second bolt surrenders, snapping in half. Serena collapses to the floor, lungs burning as the heavy chair clatters beside her. Still chained to the weight, she drags the wood to the door and listens. Faint footsteps echo upstairs, but the hallway is quiet. The door is deadlocked from the outside. An impossible puzzle. But then, she spots the exposed hinges. Eaten by thick rust, they are vulnerable. Serena wedges the chair leg under the bottom hinge, pressing down with every ounce of her fading strength. The metal groans until the pin finally pops out. The top hinge is worse, crusted over with heavy neglect. Her bloody hands violently shake from pure exhaustion, but her spirit refuses to yield. Remember this, pushing past your absolute physical breaking point is often the only way to survive the dark. Agonizing minutes crawl by as sweat stings her eyes. Finally, the top pin pops loose. Serena yanks the door inward. It fights bitterly, but the ruined hinges give just enough. She forces her bloody fingers into the gap and pulls with savage force. The wood splinters, letting her squeeze through. The dim hallway feels like a graveyard. She drags the broken chair behind her, hunting for a weapon. Suddenly, her blood turns to ice. One of Lucien's ruthless cleaners rounds the corner. His eyes widen, and his hand drops to draw his pistol. Serena does not hesitate. She swings that heavy chair like a brutal club, catching the enforcer in the face with a sickening crack. Remember this midnight lesson. In moments of extreme peril, bold action will always conquer panicked hesitation. The enforcer staggers, blood pouring down his face. Serena gives him zero time to recover. She swings the shackled chair again, aiming for his hand. The wood connects with bone, and his gun clatters across the floor. Serena dives for the weapon. As her fingers wrap around the steel, the guard grabs her hair, yanking her backward. But Serena is no longer a victim. She twists her bruised body, raises the pistol, and pulls the trigger. The gunshot is deafening. The guard drops, screaming as he clutches his shattered leg. She bursts through the heavy doors into blinding sunlight, dragging that broken chair. She spots a sleek black car near the driveway. Let me leave you with this late-night truth. You must never underestimate a desperate soul who has absolutely nothing left to lose. Serena forces her legs to keep moving, her chest burning with every ragged breath as enraged shouts echo from the main house. She refuses to look back. Reaching the getaway vehicle, she yanks the handle, but it is locked tight. Without a second thought, she drives the heavy steel of her pistol into the glass, shattering the window, and scrambles inside. No keys. Gunfire erupts, spiderwebbing the windshield inches from her face. Her heart hammers a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she rips off the steering column. Hands shaking with sheer terror, she forces two exposed wires together. The massive engine violently coughs to life. You and I both know this truth. When your back is pressed against the abyss, survival mode unlocks a desperate strength you never knew you possessed. The engine roars, a deep mechanical growl drowning out the chaos. Serena buries the gas pedal into the floorboard. The tires squeal in protest, sending armed enforcers diving into the dirt as the vehicle surges forward. Adrenaline floods her veins, blinding her to everything but escape. She still has that splintered piece of a wooden chair handcuffed to her wrist, slamming brutally against her bruised leg with every swerve. Ahead, a massive iron security gate blocks the only exit. She does not even tap the brakes. Hitting 60 miles per hour, she rams the steel barricade. The metal screams and shatters, spitting the car onto the desolate gravel road. Her white knuckles grip the wheel like a lifeline. In this dark life, when the walls close in, sometimes the only way out is to brutally shatter the barriers standing in your way. Adrian and Marcus pull up to the Syndicate estate, stepping right into the wreckage. The iron gate is mangled, and smoke bleeds into the night sky. Marcus scans the ruin, totally stunned. Near the shattered steps, an injured mobster clutches his bleeding leg. He chokes out that Serena shot him and vanished in a stolen car. Adrian does not know whether to break down in tears or laugh at her sheer defiance. The enforcer points down the dark highway. Adrian turns to Marcus, his voice thick with emotion, and orders him to track her down. The truth of the matter is simple. When the people tied to your soul are caught in the crossfire, you drop absolutely everything to keep them safe. Adrian watches him speed away, staying behind to finally walk inside and face Lucien alone. Marcus begs Adrian not to walk into that marble graveyard alone, but Adrian just shakes his head, knowing Serena surviving is the only thing that matters. Pulling out his phone, he transfers the coordinates of a remote safe house Serena secured weeks ago. He tells Marcus to deliver the buried evidence to her so she can finish tearing this syndicate apart. Marcus pleads with him not to play the tragic hero. Adrian just offers a sad, hollow smile, whispering that it is far too late for salvation. We all learn this the hard way, do we not? You must always build a quiet backup plan in the dark, because destiny rarely plays out the way you hope. Adrian steps through those towering front doors, his heart a heavy drum against his ribs. He calls out, but the only answer is a suffocating silence. A dark voice drifts down the grand staircase, heavy with doom. Lucien invites him up to finish the tragedy they started. Adrian climbs those marble steps, his legs heavy with dread. He finds the crime boss in his dimly lit office. Lucien quietly admits he totally underestimated Serena, but Adrian demands he let her walk away, insisting the bad blood is between the two of them alone. Lucien turns, his calm mask shattering to reveal a man consumed by unhinged rage. He screams that Adrian destroyed 7 years of ruthless empire building. The tragedy of life is that unchecked greed will always blind a man to the actual destruction he causes. Adrian fires back that Lucien manipulated them both. But the boss just smiles coldly, stating that Adrian is exactly the same kind of monster he is. Adrian stares into the eyes of his tormentor and vows to fix this twisted mess. Lucien just laughs, a hollow, broken sound that chills the room. He tells Adrian that threatening to expose the syndicate was a fatal error, signing a death warrant for him and the woman he loves. He gloats that armed hitmen are already flooding the midnight streets. Hearing that, Adrian completely loses his grip on reason. He lunges across the shadows and buries his fist into his former mentor's jaw. But Lucien is a hardened phantom of the underworld. He barely flinches, driving a brutal elbow into Adrian's ribs before smashing his face violently against the heavy oak desk. You and I know the bitter truth here. Never bring bare knuckles to a fight against a man who has spent his entire life mastering the brutal art of pain. The room spins as Adrian slumps to the floor, crimson blood dripping from his face. Lucien stands over his broken body, hissing that a smart man would have stayed down. But the fire inside Adrian refuses to die. His desperate hand blindly searches the floorboards and wraps around a sharp metal letter opener. With an agonizing roar, he swings wildly, slicing deep into the boss's arm. Lucien screams in raw fury and pulls a heavy pistol from his coat. Adrian throws his battered frame behind the oak desk just as a storm of bullets begins shredding the wood to splinters. Pressing his face to the floor, his heart hammering, he completely accepts his fate, praying his sacrifice buys Serena time to escape. True loyalty means bleeding out in the dark so the one you cherish can finally survive. Adrian forces himself up, clutching that tiny letter opener. Lucien raises his weapon, aiming right at his chest. But in that final second, the massive window violently explodes. Shattered glass rains down as Serena crashes through the frame. She hits the floor rolling, her face bruised, the broken leg of a wooden chair still chained to her bleeding wrist. She rises with a stolen pistol. 2 deafening shots echo through the room, striking the boss in the chest. Lucien drops his gun, eyes wide with total disbelief, as dark stains blossom across his shirt. He mutters that she was supposed to be locked away. Serena just glares at him with ice in her veins, stating that she never plays by the rules. Listen to me on this one. Never underestimate a broken soul who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The underworld king hits the floorboards like a heavy stone. The room falls silent except for Serena's ragged breathing, her hands visibly trembling as she lowers the gun. Adrian is utterly paralyzed, staring at her as if she were a ghost. He whispers that he cannot believe she actually came back. Her voice cracks as she calls him an idiot, asking if he thought she would let him die after everything they survived. She grabs his torn shirt, warning him that the armed guards are rushing the house. His legs feel like lead, but they scramble down the stairs and burst out the front doors. Marcus is already idling in the getaway vehicle. They dive into the back seat, and the tires scream into the night. Remember this truth. True friends never abandon the ones they care about when the absolute worst goes down. As the massive mansion fades into the rearview mirror, Adrian wants to believe the nightmare is finally over, but he looks at Serena in the dim back seat. She is pale, bleeding, and still chained to a shattered piece of a wooden chair. The heavy realization sinks into his bones. The true chaos is only just beginning. They drive 3 hours north toward a secluded cabin she rented months ago under a fake identity. It perfectly proves that sometimes deep paranoia is the only thing keeping you breathing. Marcus grips the wheel in total silence, frantically checking his mirrors. When they arrive, he grabs a rusted hacksaw to finally free her bruised wrist from the heavy wood. The brutal lesson here? Always keep a solid backup plan, because your reality will almost certainly get much worse before it gets better. The drive is consumed by suffocating silence, because anything spoken out loud would sound like pure madness. They reach the hidden cabin as the sunset paints the sky in dark red ash. Marcus kills the engine and drops the agonizing truth. With the boss dead, the entire underground network will rip the city apart to hunt them down. He begs them to vanish tonight, but Serena straight up refuses to run. Marcus looks at her like she has lost mind, reminding her she literally shot the guy twice. But Serena just grits her teeth, pushing through the intense pain in her shoulders. The job is not finished. She wants to hand the secret logs over to the cops and watch the whole empire burn to the ground. Sometimes, facing your absolute worst fears head-on is the only real way to finally earn your freedom. Serena argues they must step up as state witnesses, not cower in the shadows. Marcus rubs his tired eyes, shaking his head like she has completely lost the plot. He reminds her they are testifying against the most lethal mobsters in the country, seriously doubting any protection program will keep them breathing. But Serena fires back that doing nothing is just a slower death sentence. Adrian speaks up, pressing a soaked rag to his bruised face, and fully agrees they have to finish this war. Marcus stares at them like they belong in a psychiatric ward. With a heavy sigh, he tosses a cheap burner phone into her lap. He tells them to set up the meeting, making it crystal clear that if things go entirely wrong, he was never there. Honestly, making the right moral choice often means you must be willing to stand completely alone in the freezing dark. Marcus gives them exactly 2 hours to sort this out before he turns and vanishes into the dark woods to keep watch. Left alone, Serena simply stares at Adrian. The man is utterly wrecked. His swollen face is a bruised map of pure agony, looking like he aged 10 years in just a few days. In a quiet, broken voice, he tells her she never should have risked her life for him. She shoots back that she had no other choice. He asks why, especially after their poisoned history. Serena feels the tears coming. She confesses he was the very first person to ever search for her when she was truly lost in the dark. Adrian clenches his jaw, entirely unable to speak. It reminds us that sometimes a single act of genuine loyalty can rewrite a lifetime of toxic mistakes. Serena punches in the number for the city prosecutor. Fast forward to 10 at night. You and I can picture this deeply depressing, windowless room. Surprisingly, Marcus stuck around to watch their backs. Across the cold table sits the heavy hitter squad. District Attorney Rachel Chen, a few feds, and an intense agent who looks like a machine. Rachel is a sharp veteran who plays no games. She stares them down, trying to process the madness. She asks if they are seriously claiming the wealthiest billionaire in the city was a mob boss, and they just ended his life. Serena meets her cold stare and firmly corrects her, calling it pure self-defense. The lesson here is to never let anyone in a position of power twist your desperate actions to fit their comfortable narrative. Serena doubles down, her voice steady. She explains the boss was mere seconds away from erasing them forever. Rachel demands the location of the body, and Serena surrenders the coordinates of the massive estate. Then comes the shift. Rachel asks if they brought any hard proof. Adrian quietly slides a thick folder across the table. This is the holy grail they spent sleepless nights building. Hidden bank logs, dirty emails, and names exposing dark corruption. The federal agent opens it, his face a stone mask, while the lawyers crowd around. Silence in that room is absolute. Rachel finally looks up, breathing heavily, and admits this is massive, listing off charges like racketeering and major fraud. Always remember that hard work and solid receipts will always speak far louder than empty promises. Stick with me here, because this is the agonizing catch. Rachel points out that while the evidence is a goldmine, it only points to fake shell companies. They desperately need real people to testify against this dark empire. Without missing a beat, Serena volunteers them both. Rachel warns that the underground will be hunting them for blood, but Serena does not blink. Rachel just stares, taking in Serena's bruised face and Adrian's busted nose. She asks why they would choose this nightmare when they could easily grab fake identities and vanish. Serena replies that running away only delays the inevitable. Adrian quietly adds that it is simply the right thing to do. The deep truth in life is that turning a blind eye to a heavy problem will never actually make it disappear. Rachel almost lets a smile slip. She bluntly warns them that choosing the moral high ground is about to make their lives an absolute living hell. They both nod, fully embracing the terrifying stakes. Rachel snaps the folder shut and declares that heads are going to roll. The FBI agent stands up, announcing they are being shipped to a secret lockdown bunker upstate. You can physically see the light leave Serena's eyes. She just clawed her way out of one violent trap, only to step it right into another cold cage with zero control. Yet, she swallows her battered pride and agrees. This is the agonizing price tag on true justice. They are shoved out the back door and tossed into a van with blacked-out windows. We must remember, genuine sacrifice often means giving up your own total freedom to protect the greater good. Before leaving, Marcus offers Adrian a firm handshake. He admits they are far braver than he ever imagined. Adrian lets out a tired laugh, joking that maybe they are just completely stupid. Marcus flashes a rare smile, noting that bravery and stupidity are often the exact same thing. As the van rolls away, Serena watches the bright city lights blur into shadows through a crack in the glass. She is leaving behind an entire war zone. Beside her, Adrian awkwardly stares at his bruised hands. The silence in that dark space is incredibly heavy, loaded with trauma neither knows how to process. Finally, Serena breaks the quiet and whispers a simple apology. At the end of the long night, owning up to your massive mistakes is the first real step to healing. Picture this with me. We are jumping right back into the boiling point of this wreckage. Adrian looks at Serena, offering a broken apology for using her just like Lucian did. But Serena shuts him down cold. The man swallows hard, his fragile pride shattered. He admits the agonizing truth. For 7 long years, he stole her brilliant work, feeding his twisted ego until he believed he was the sole mastermind. He erased her identity, knowing an apology will never fix it. Serena looks him dead in the eyes, her voice sharp as glass. She promises that when the press digs, she will burn his fake legacy to the ground and tell the world whose genius truly built his empire. The brutal lesson here is that the truth will always find the light, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Adrian slowly nods, swearing he will make sure her name is the one history remembers. Serena just stares at him. This is the man she loved deeply, the guy she grew to despise. Now, she does not even know what to call him. He looks entirely broken. Yet, for the first time, he looks like a real, flawed human being instead of a walking ego. She tells him his weak apology does not make them even, and it does not make them friends. He takes the blow, muttering that it is at least a start. Then we cut to their bleak new reality. They are locked away in a protective custody facility that feels like a sterile, concrete dungeon. It is isolated, designed to scrub you entirely off the map. We must realize that true redemption is an incredibly lonely road, usually walked in the absolute darkest isolation. The days blur into a numbing loop of exhausting debriefings with ruthless agents. They drag her through the mud, making her break down every agonizing detail about Lucian and his dark operation. Serena goes through the motions, acting like a broken robot. In the quiet of the night, she stares at the cold ceiling, wondering if she will ever feel safe again. She chased revenge for so long, and now that she has it, the prize feels completely empty. 3 weeks into this nightmare, Agent Rachel Chen bursts onto the scene. She tracks Serena down by a barred window in the dreary common room and drops a massive bomb. Zero small talk. The huge wave of arrests has officially begun. The hard truth here is that revenge rarely heals a bleeding wound. It only leaves you standing alone in the silent aftermath. Let us pause and look at this together, because the scale of this takedown is insane. 43 powerful villains tied to this bloodline are going down hard. Serena's testimony was the key that ripped this dark syndicate apart. They found Lucian's body exactly where she left him, and the medical examiner made her self-defense claim absolutely bulletproof. Chen genuinely calls her a legend for dismantling the biggest crime family around, but Serena is not feeling the hero vibe. Her soul is too heavy. Chen hits her with the chilling reality. The trial kicks off in 3 months. If she survives the hit squads, the feds offer a total wipe. Fresh cities, new names. The real lesson here? Escaping your darkest demons often requires you to completely erase the person you used to be. Serena lets out a brutally bitter laugh. Start over as who? She has spent years playing so many desperate roles to survive. She has zero clue who the real Serena even is anymore. Seeing her broken spirit, Chen actually softens. She quietly suggests that figuring out her true identity is the exact quest she needs to conquer next. A brand new life where no powerful boss is pulling her strings. Chen tells her to use this time wisely and walks away, leaving her alone with that heavy truth. Fast forward, and the huge trial is an absolute media circus. Every news outlet is packing the courtroom. The charges against this dark empire are staggering. We are talking major racketeering, massive money laundering, brutal extortion, and murder. Real healing always requires us to peel off the heavy masks we wore just to survive. 43 high-level mobsters sit in that courtroom, men who have been dangerously powerful and totally untouchable their entire lives. Until today, Serena steps up to the stand first. She wears no flashy gear, just a basic gray suit and zero makeup. She looks beautifully raw. She stares right into the souls of the jury and spills every agonizing secret. She explains how she married the boss just to stay alive, and the terrifying night he locked her in a dungeon. The defense lawyers go absolutely rabid. They try to rip her credibility to shreds, branding her a lying opportunist and a scorned woman who faked the evidence. But Serena does not blink. She survived literal monsters in the dark. Angry men in fancy suits hold zero power over her. True strength is standing firm in your own truth, even when the room tries to paint you as the villain. Are you catching this, late night listeners? Because I am sitting here just absolutely floored. Picture that freezing courtroom. They ask Serena why she ever married the boss. Her answer? She was just running from one monster who erased her, only to fall straight into the arms of a worse one. The whole room goes dead silent. Then, Adrian takes the stand, physically shaking, and finally admits he ripped off her absolute genius to build his empire. The lawyers tear them both apart, calling her a victim, then a calculating mastermind. Adrian stares at her with these red, broken eyes, but Serena just gives him pure ice. 6 brutal weeks later, the gavel bangs. 38 guilty convictions. But there is no victory parade for her, just a dark, bone-deep exhaustion. Sometimes survival costs you everything. Agent Chen finds her shivering in a back hallway, hiding from the flashbulbs. He whispers that she finally won the war. Serena just shakes her head, eyes hollow. Nobody wins a game like this. They just crawl out alive. The feds slide a sweet deal across the cold metal table. A new name, a quiet city, enough cash to just vanish completely. She stares at that paper, then pushes it back. She is entirely done letting people erase her. She will take her chances as herself. They release her on a rainy Tuesday. The exact same day, Adrian walks out. They end up on the exact same curb. 2 utterly shattered souls who absolutely destroyed each other. yet somehow kept each other breathing, staring into the grey unknown. A stark reminder that sometimes our greatest enemies are the only ones who truly know us. The silence is heavy before Adrian finally asks the million-dollar question, what happens now? Serena stares out at the smoggy horizon, admitting she has no idea, but whatever comes next, it is going to be hers. Then Adrian drops a quiet bombshell. His massive corporation is being carved up by the government, but the core technology, the brilliant algorithms that made the magic happen, legally belong to her. He is handing the keys back, not as a savior, but just returning what he so ruthlessly stole. The entire foundation is hers to command. She looks for the trap, demanding to know why, but the toxic ego that used to rule his face is completely gone. In its place is just raw, bleeding regret. It goes to show that true remorse does not make excuses, it just makes things right. Stick with me here, friends, because this is where the dark clouds start to part. He tells Serena to take her genius and build something better than his empire. He climbs into a black sedan and vanishes. Watching those taillights fade, something rigid inside her finally breaks. It is not forgiveness, some wounds never fully close, but it is the quiet exhale of letting go. 6 months later, she is standing outside a sleek new building. It is no skyscraper, but the bold sign out front reads Veil Technologies. It is entirely hers. She pulled herself out of the ashes, hired a loyal crew, and brought her work into the light. No more hiding behind false kings to make them rich. Every single line of code now bears her name. A beautiful lesson that the best revenge is simply rebuilding your life. Stepping out on your own is absolutely terrifying. But man, the freedom is intoxicating. Her new assistant peeks through the glass doors, giving a subtle nod. The heaviest investor meeting of her life starts in 10 minutes. Serena gives that metal sign one last proud look, takes a deep breath, and marches inside. The boardroom is completely flooded with morning light. 5 serious venture capitalists are waiting at the table. These sharks know her dark history, the betrayals, the courtroom trauma, and they want to bet millions on her anyway. She opens her laptop. No toxic partner standing in the way. No fake visionary stealing her thunder. She looks those financial titans dead in the eye, her voice steady as a rock, and says, "Good morning. Let me show you exactly what I have built." But what about our fallen tech king? Adrian's path took a different turn into the shadows. He did not try to claw his way back up. Instead, he took the last scraps of cash from his shattered empire and quietly gave it all away. He set up anonymous scholarships and secretly funded young creators who were bleeding out under greedy bosses. His name never appeared on a single check. Then he faded into a sleepy town, landing a quiet job teaching business ethics at a community college. The heavy irony is not lost on him, but his students just see a guy who survived the worst flames. Sitting in his dark apartment, he still thinks about Serena. Xia, he genuinely hopes her new company took over the world. It reminds us that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find your actual soul. You and I have been walking through this dark alley together, and this next moment really hits home. One rainy night, Adrian's phone buzzes. It is a reporter from a massive tech magazine, putting together a cover story on the meteoric rise of Veil Technologies. She asks him for a direct quote regarding Serena's actual role in his old empire. Adrian's throat goes completely tight. He closes his tired eyes. This is the final, agonizing test. In this split second, he could easily spin the narrative, claim they were equal partners, and steal one last slice of her hard-earned glory. But he refuses. He finally understands. Sometimes, the truest way to prove you have defeated your own demons is to step back into the dark and let the real mastermind wear the crown she earned. Listen closely to this, because it changes everything. Instead of playing the tragic victim to salvage his bleeding reputation, Adrian hands the reporter the absolute truth. He confesses that Serena Vale was the sole architect behind his entire corporate machine. The brilliant algorithms, the aggressive strategies, it was all her blood and sweat. He openly admits his fragile ego could not handle sharing the spotlight. He was just the shiny, hollow nameplate on the door. When he finally hangs up the phone, sitting alone in his quiet apartment, a massive wave of relief washes over him. It really just goes to show that the heaviest weight a person can ever carry is a fake identity. The only way you can truly breathe again is to shatter the illusion and own your worst mistakes. 3 days pass. Serena picks up a fresh copy of TechWire, featuring a massive spread on her new empire. The pages detail her agonizing crawl from being totally erased to becoming a titan. But right there, in the middle column, is that raw quote from Adrian. Her breath hitches in her chest. She reads his exact words, stripping away his own armor, admitting he was nothing but a frightened fraud who stole her credit out of deep insecurity. He confessed to the entire world that she was the sole genius behind everything he ever built. Serena sits perfectly still in her office, reading that one paragraph 3 separate times. It just proves that the truth always has a brutal way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how desperately someone tries to bury it in the dirt. She slowly closes the magazine and just stares out the massive glass window. This is her territory now, a fortress built from her own grit, one that absolutely no one can ever rip away. For a fleeting second, her hand hovers over her phone. Does she call him? Does she scream? Or does she thank him? But she just lets her hand fall. She realizes some emotional debts are far too heavy to be settled by a magazine quote. Still, holding that public confession in her hands brings a strange, quiet closure. You do not need a perfect apology from the ghosts of your past to keep building your future. She takes a deep breath, shakes the memories away, and gets right back to work. There are investors waiting, a massive launch next month, and a loyal crew who looks to her to lead the way. 2 long years fade into the rearview. Serena gets an invite to headline a massive tech summit right back in the same city where her nightmare began. Her first instinct is a hard pass. Those streets are stained with way too much trauma. But her assistant reminds her that returning as a queen is the ultimate way to silence the ghosts. So she signs the contract. Cut to the night of the event. She is pacing backstage, the heavy bass of the intro music making her heart hammer against her ribs. Peeking through the velvet curtains, she sees 2,000 hungry faces waiting for her. Walking back into the fire that burned you is terrifying. But honestly, facing that darkness is the only way we truly grow. The host's voice echoes through the speakers, and the crowd completely erupts. The host hypes her to the rafters, calling her the visionary who turned total erasure into an empire. The auditorium shakes with applause. Serena steps out into the blinding white lights, grips the podium, and looks out. Then time stops. Her eyes lock onto a solitary figure standing in the very back row. Adrian, looking visibly older, carrying the heavy weight of his choices. Across that roaring room, their eyes meet. He gives her one slight nod, a quiet mix of deep respect, a silent apology, and a permanent goodbye. She holds his gaze, then nods slowly back. And that is the real takeaway for you and I tonight. True peace is looking your darkest nightmare in the eye and feeling nothing but your own quiet strength. Serena turns back to the sea of faces. The silence in the room feels heavy. She looks out at them, her voice steady but carrying the ghost of a girl who used to believe she was nothing. 7 years ago, a man with too much power convinced her she was just a disposable shadow. She admits she swallowed those toxic lies, and it almost completely broke her. Then she drops a hard truth. You are never erased unless you hand over the eraser yourself. Nobody can mute your voice unless you swallow your words. Your worth is never measured by the people trying to keep you down. She lets that life lessons sink into the quiet room. She clawed her way out of the gutter, and sure, the payback tasted sweet, but the real victory was rebuilding her own soul. A wave of laughter ripples through the crowd. Serena smiles, a smile earned through bitter tears. She dragged herself back to the top because she refused to let a hollow villain write her final chapter. You and I both know how hard it is to rewrite a story someone else ruined. She lets her gaze drift toward Adrian for one agonizing second. He sits there completely wrecked, tears streaming as guilt eats him alive. Turning away, she delivers her final blow to the room. She tells anyone who has ever been treated like dirt that their light matters. The crowd goes wild, jumping to their feet in a massive ovation. Standing there, she feels totally free. The lesson here is profound. When you stop begging for the approval of others, you become an unstoppable force. The mood shifts the moment Serena steps out into the cold city night. Standing by her car like a ghost is Adrian. She stops, her voice as icy as the wind, and tells him he has zero right to be there. He nods, looking like a shattered man who expects her to call the guards. But she does not. They just stand there in an agonizing silence. It is tragic, looking at them, two forces who burned each other to ashes, somehow still breathing in the wreckage. Adrian looks painfully small now, stripped of his fake armor. The truth here is that people who spend their time trying to ruin others usually end up destroying themselves first. He quietly whispers that she gave a beautiful speech. She politely says, "Thank you," keeping her emotional walls locked tight. Adrian stands there, his hands trembling. He admits he meant every word in that confession. He is not looking for forgiveness, knowing his actions were unforgivable. He desperately needs her to know he finally sees the genius she always was, and regrets it took losing his empire to open his eyes. Serena refuses the pity party. She reminds him he willingly set his own life on fire. They are not friends, they are nothing. But after a long pause, she breathes out and says maybe, someday, they can just be two tired people who survived the same war. The life lesson here is heavy. Sometimes dropping the active weight of hatred is the only way you can ever really move forward. He simply nods, knowing that is far more mercy than he actually deserves. He turns to leave, pausing only to say he is genuinely proud of the empire she built. Then he fades into the dark crowd. Serena slides into her car. The silence is heavy. There are no dramatic tears, no screaming at the wheel. She is just bone-tired and ready to finally go home. True healing does not always look like a loud victory. Sometimes it is simply being too exhausted to keep fighting your past ghosts. Over the next 3 years, her company absolutely explodes. We are talking about a $200 million titan dominating the entire market. The absolute best part of her success. She aggressively hires the broken underdogs. She builds a radically transparent company, ensuring every single person who was ever silenced gets the loud public credit they rightfully deserve. Climbing to the peak of the mountain is an incredibly lonely journey. Serena never gets married. Her days are packed, endlessly challenging, but her life is owned entirely by her alone. On quiet nights, looking over the glittering city, her mind drifts. She thinks about Lucian, Adrian, and the innocent version of herself she had to sacrifice to win this ugly war. She does not regret burning her enemies to the ground, but those scars ache in the cold. The life lesson here is painful. Revenge, even when justified, always comes with a massive hidden tax. It cost her 7 long years and her basic trust in humanity. But at the end of the day, she survived the brutal fire. She proved to the world that nobody can keep you permanently erased. And the hard truth always hits back. 5 years after the fallout with Lucian, Serena finds a random envelope. No return address, but she instantly recognizes the handwriting. It is Adrian. He writes that he is a teacher now, working to ensure his students never become the corporate monster he used to be. He actually teaches his class all about Serena. He uses her story to prove that real brilliance never has to backstab to reach the top. It is wild how the universe works. The exact man who tried to erase her legacy is now keeping her name respected by the next generation. He expects no reply. The deep life lesson here is beautiful. Sometimes, your absolute biggest victories are the quiet, unseen ripples of positive change you spark in the very people who once tried to break you. Adrian explains how he stops students from stealing ideas. He knows this will never erase the damage he caused, but he is trying. He prays she never wastes another thought on him. His final sentence hits the hardest. He writes that she did not just save herself from destruction, she saved him too. Serena reads those words 3 times in the quiet of her room. Then, she calmly folds the paper, places it in a drawer, and locks it away forever. She never writes him back. The lesson here is crucial. You do not always owe someone your forgiveness just to find your own peace. Some stories do not need a neat ending, and some wounds just stay as permanent scars. Sometimes, the only real closure you ever get is simply putting one foot in front of the other. We have reached the end of the line. 10 years after that grueling trial, a journalist asks Serena the ultimate question. Knowing the pain, the violence, and the dark years of pure stress, would she choose revenge again? Serena looks at her massive corporate empire, thinking of the loyal people she lifted out of the mud. She looks the reporter dead in the eye and drops a cold truth. She never actually chose revenge. She chose survival, and her survival just happened to look like fighting back. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Not because destroying her enemies felt good, but because she made it out breathing. The final life lesson today? When the world is actively trying to erase your existence, simply surviving and thriving is the absolute greatest rebellion of all. Serena was robbed blind, thrown into a dungeon, and nearly murdered by a ruthless Mafia villain. But she shattered every single cage they built for her. The true finale does not happen in a bloody shootout. It happens in a quiet cafe by the harbor, the exact spot where she first plotted her comeback. She sits there, casually sipping an espresso, scrolling through her laptop. Her inbox is flooded with emails from investors who finally see her as a dominant powerhouse, not just a ghost. The warm autumn sun hits her tired face, and for the first time, Serena feels it. True, unfiltered peace, the ultimate life lesson from this saga, the absolute best revenge you can ever get on the people who tried to break you is simply living a wildly successful life, completely without them. Come with me for one last look at the aftermath. Serena sits quietly in a busy cafe. She is not overflowing with happiness, nor is she free from the agonizing scars of her past. But she has this heavy certainty radiating from her core. She transformed into the fierce person she was always meant to be. Nobody can ever take that power away from her. Not Adrian with his ego, not Lucien with his violent empire. She casually snaps her laptop shut, finishes at you and confidently walks back out into the city that failed to destroy her. Only this time, she is not running to hide in the shadows. She completely owns these streets now. The ultimate life lesson here: true power is not about dodging the dangerous fire. It is about letting that fire forge you into absolute steel. Serena's revenge against Adrian is carefully planned, intelligent, and satisfying on the surface. She does not return crying or begging. Instead, she returns with resources, legal power, business control, and proof of what Adrian stole from her. She takes back what was built from her ideas and forces him to face the truth. However, after she wins, she does not feel the joy she expected. This is one of the most educational parts of the story. Revenge may correct a visible imbalance, but it does not automatically heal the emotional wound underneath. Serena destroys Adrian's power, but the emptiness remains because her pain was not only about money or ownership. It was about betrayal, humiliation, and years of being unseen. This teaches an important lesson. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. Justice restores truth, accountability, and dignity. Revenge can sometimes become a fire that burns the person holding it. Serena's actions expose Adrian's wrongdoing, which is necessary. But when revenge becomes her entire identity, she becomes vulnerable to Lucian's manipulation. He understands her anger and uses it as a doorway into her life. This is a warning for viewers. Pain can make us powerful, but it can also make us easier to control if we are not careful. Education should help people peacefully process betrayal in healthy ways. It should teach that anger can be useful when it helps us set boundaries and seek accountability, but dangerous when it blinds us to new risks. Serena's story reminds us that healing requires more than defeating the person who hurt us. It requires reclaiming peace, rebuilding identity, and choosing a future that is not controlled by the past.